and they were getting Stanley knives and things like that, and taping Stanley knives to wood to throw, and it just makes you think it's so primeval. I don't know, it sounds a bit weird, but it's like they're making spears to throw at us.
Africans making spears, then throwing them. What would we call that? Well, we might find that out later on in this video, but in the meantime, do the thing the algorithm likes. We're making our way to that 10,000 subscriber goal. Now let's get into it. Why are criminals of a certain demographic portrayed as good boys who didn't do nothing when they meet their fate at the hands of the police? And then they become martyrs for radical left-wing ideologies? We're going to look into all that today, so let's get into it. We all saw the devastation caused in 2020 by the peaceful protests across the United States following the death of George Floyd. And while history doesn't really repeat, it definitely rhymes. And in 2011, in London, a very similar situation unfolded where a city that used to be the centre of the world, of the most glorious empire the world has ever seen, now at the dawn of the 21st century, it has descended into chaos, into the hands of those undeserving to inherit such a rich history. But let's cover some of the history that led up to this riot, just so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
August 2011. Under the red blanket, a man lies dead, shot by police minutes earlier. This was filmed by a member of the public. The dead man was Mark Duggan, a 29-year-old father of 6 from Tottenham. Today his family heard an inquest jury conclude that his killing by police was lawful, a finding that had been greeted with cries of fury inside the court. The killing of Mark Duggan prompted a protest at the time, which sparked a riot, and the unrest spread across England. The subsequent destruction and looting was the worst in a generation. Police had identified Mark Duggan as a senior member of a violent gang, Tottenham Mandem. A police briefing said he'd been arrested but never charged for possession of guns and attempted murder.
But that Mark Duggan had a gun and that V53 had an honest and reasonable belief that Mark Duggan still had the gun when he shot him.
On the day Mark Duggan was shot, police had intelligence he was going to pick up a gun. They followed a minicab as he collected a shoebox containing the weapon. As Mark Duggan later headed for Tottenham, armed police in unmarked cars forced the minicab to stop. The inquest had to consider what happened here. When Mark Duggan got out of the minicab, did he pose an imminent threat to the police? Were the officers right when they said that he was holding a gun? And if so, how did the gun end up some 20 feet away on the other side of the fence?
So in summary, we have a known criminal gangster who we know at this time, because of the intelligence gathered, the police knew he had a gun in his possession. Now unfortunately there is no body cam footage, so all we have are these reconstructions and testimonies as to what unfolded following Mark Duggan's taxi being pulled over. And to lay this out in the simplest terms, the taxi stopped, Mark got out, he had a gun in his hand, and he was shot. And he was shot at some point during the confrontation. He was either shot before or after the gun was thrown over a nearby wall, which landed about 7 meters away. Mark was shot twice, and he was killed from the injuries he sustained. Some key takeaways that following the reports from the police after the incident is that they all say that they very clearly saw the gun in his hand. Some even specify that it was wrapped in a sock, but none could be really sure when the gun was actually thrown. Now during my research there was a lot of uncertainty from the mainstream outlets as to whether or not Mark Duggan was a threat or not when he was shot. And that's what a lot of these videos I found just focus on discussing. Was he a threat? If so, was it justified? Now this brings into focus the argument that the police may not have been justified in shooting him. But unlike Derek Chauvin, who apprehended a drug-fueled felon and is behind bars for his heroic actions, The police officer, known only as V35, was not charged, and this was all concluded following an investigation that lasted 4 years and it concluded in 2015 after the initial event took place. Now, I don't really need to go into the details of why I personally do not like the police. I generally feel that they're now just government henchmen who are simply not out to protect you. They're there to enforce the laws, but only the laws which are politically convenient at the time. And I would probably just refer to Peter Hitchens as embodying most of my feelings towards modern policing, especially within the UK. But obviously I don't hate everything they do. They put themselves at risk dealing with the absolute dregs of society, being spat on, being shouted at, and are exposed to a lot of life-changing situations. And something I noticed from watching a lot of police body cam videos from the United States is that I understand how a situation, in less than 2 seconds, it can escalate to extremely life-threatening. And if you're like me, who goes through a little scroll of Live Leak from time to time, and you come across a body cam video, you can almost predict everything that's going to happen within these body cam videos. The police officer approaches the suspect and is asked to put their hands up. The suspect does the opposite. The police warn that if you don't comply, drop the gun, drop the knife, or whatever it might be, you're going to be shot. The suspect, again, does the opposite, and they get shot. And sometimes they take their chances to attack or aim at the officers, and the officer just has to defend themselves. And here's a very recent one that I came across. This is Sydney Wilson, and with some editorial liberties that I took in order to portray this to you. Without needing a super detailed reconstruction, I can already kind of piece together what happened and how the officers felt in this very fast, life-threatening situation. They're aiming at the taxi. Mark Duggan, gun in hand, exits the taxi. Police see him with the gun. That's a threat. The police delete the threat. And as the reconstruction shows, this all happens in about 2 seconds. If Mark did not want to get shot, he did not need to have the gun in his hand. Why is no one in the media actually mentioning this? Why are the police not getting any sort of sympathy and thanks for putting down this dangerous, known criminal gangster who, when confronted with armed police, he greets them with a gun in his hand?
He began by moving his right foot away from the minicab at an angle of around 22 degrees. As his left foot followed, he was struck by the burst bullet, which passed through his right bicep and hit W42 in his underarm radio.
Now, this is a bit of an L for the police, and I suppose it exposes that the UK police are not as well versed in gunfights, as getting into a crossfire position, it could have ended up far worse than it did. But I think it also adds to the fact that everything happens so fast. But perhaps if we continue to be culturally enriched, as we have been over the last 15 years since this incident, the police will have, and I'm sure they have had, plenty more opportunities to be in this exact same situation again and again. So what happened following a violent criminal being executed by the police? Well, let's cover this very quick highlight reel and pick out some interesting bits that could be worth commenting on.
Adelakan called for backup. The Met admits it should have arrived sooner. For 2 hours, his officers were outnumbered and under-equipped. They came under relentless attack.
We're talking wheelie bins on fire, we're talking bottles that had been gained from the off-licence, which was literally down the road, been set alight, been made into firebombs and thrown at us. We're talking about, believe this or not, a fridge freezer that was pulled out of a shop and wheeled towards us.
One of the strongest findings in our research was that police on the front line feared they would be killed. Senior officers, too, were astonished that no police died. Despite these fears, in Tottenham, as elsewhere, police kept charging forward.
We were coming under the heaviest bombardment of the whole night. supermarket trolleys were being used by the rioters to stock up with full bricks from a nearby building site. We got level with the Prince of Wales public house, and I just remember feeling bottles exploding on lampposts next to me and just getting showered totally in glass. We just did not have the resources at that point in time to arrest people. Our priority was to protect our colleagues from the other emergency services so that they could save life.
Roberts was forced to watch intense fires sweep across Croydon. The firefighters needed police escorts. He told them he had run out.
I was brought up there, married there, you know, it's my town. Seeing my own borough then suffering in the way that it did, again was quite hard to take.
He and a colleague were then posted outside a JD Sports that had been looted.
There's people coming up taking photos, because obviously I'm there, and there's comments coming from the crowd, oh, you've got injured, and all sort of, look there, what happened to you? And I remember they're taking photos and inviting them over to come and have a picture with us. So I'm there, arms round them, smiling with a black eye, having a photo that's probably going to go on their Facebook or MySpace and be ridiculed for it. But at that time, that tactic was working for me. It softened this crowd that could have...
Now let's just compare this to the summer 2024 riots in the UK. I don't remember seeing any mass looting, and if there was, this would have been rammed down our throats by the media. And I don't think the police would tolerate anyone from those riots in 2024 taking pictures with them. Now, a little bit of insight here. I won't comment much, but I used to work loosely within the emergency services, so I've got a broad understanding of how the police, the ambulance and the fire services, how they all coordinate with one another across the country. And the Met Police's reaction and their handling of this chaotic situation is really not surprising, and that's all I'll really say on that. Now let's focus on something a little bit more interesting. Why does this sort of thing happen when a criminal didn't do is in the act of committing a crime? They end up paying the ultimate price for the criminality, but they end up just becoming a beacon of proof that our Western civilizations are actually just cesspools of white supremacy that are just hell-bent on keeping the black man down. If I made this video in 2023, I would say that the native Brits they've been psyoped into seeking no revenge. There's no backlash, and preaching how we should just move forward and not look back in anger when a blatant attack against the native people takes place. However, since 2024, we have this young Welsh choir boy to thank for being the straw that broke the white man's back. And for the first time in my lifetime, white people were in the street causing a riot, and it had nothing to do with football. This was a real example of the native people being victimised and attacked. But it's not an isolated incident. These attacks against the native people have been occurring en masse over the past several decades. June 2020 in Reading, the Forbury Gardens stabbing. July 2023, the Nottingham attack happened. November 2019, the London Bridge knife rampage. And in Glasgow 2020, another asylum seeker going out on a stabbing spree. And this is all in addition to the ongoing grooming gangs that are specifically targeting white native British girls within the UK. These are just a few examples of foreigners attacking, killing, or exploiting the native population. In each case, there are excuses by the media. For example, I remember being in Glasgow very near the site where an asylum seeker stabbed someone to death outside the hotel that they were being paid to be in. And Sky News said something along the lines of that there were complaints that the hotel Wi-Fi was bad, and that might have led, or at least helped lead, to violence. I can't find this report anywhere, but I remember this so vividly. If anyone can help me find it, please let me know. But that stuck in my mind as a radicalization moment for me. But I did find this clip in all my digging, which is equally as awful.
Now, I gather you've worked with the asylum seeker and refugee community in the city. I mean, what can you tell us about the tensions that have been reported that the First Minister referred to herself during this time in which people have been moved out of the flats that they were living in and made to go into these hotels?
there has been a lot of anxiety about what would happen to people once the people have been moved into various places of safe accommodation during the COVID crisis, and there's been a lot of anxiety about what would happen at the end of that, and also people fearing evictions. And these are people who are frightened anyway. These are people who have come from all around the world, from across Europe and beyond, looking for a place of safety. So they're often they're very tense people, they're very anxious people, and they're looking for somewhere to settle, and that inevitably leads to tension when that's threatened.
Had you heard about tension in the hotels themselves? I mean, some reports have said that, you know, people felt their freedoms had been taken away to some degree, and they were likening them to prisons.
The residents of that hotel, Jonathan.
Well, I don't know whether they're like prisons. It's hard to say. I've not been in any of these hotels, but I know that they have been fairly crowded, and I know that people have been quite anxious. I mean, all of us have felt as though we've been in prisons during lockdown. All of us have felt as though we couldn't move about. So it's understandable, I think, that any community that's confined in fairly close quarters is going to feel very anxious at the moment.
Listen to how this reverend, when questioned about what may have led up to this horror show, he just says, well, you know, people living in cramped environments and they can't do very much because of the COVID restrictions. People are just a little bit tense and anxious. Why didn't he say what happened was terrible, and I'm glad the police stopped him, and it's a shame they couldn't get to him earlier, and it's a shame that we, the taxpayer, were funding this cycle to be housed, fed and watered only for him to go on this rampage. I hate to say it, but this is modern Christianity failing right in front of our eyes by gaslighting us as a people not to care about the real reasons as to why this attack occurred. Why are certain minority communities, usually black, behave so differently in the wake of one of their own dying in such a public way? Is it natural? Is it being programmed into them? Well, today let's just focus on the programming that has been systemic in Western civilization for decades. Now, unfortunately, I don't think I can go into that much detail for YouTube reasons. However, I'll read out some quotes. Only after the black voter realizes that all whites are his enemies can the white proletariat begin his own revolution. If the whites hate the blacks themselves must accelerate the quarrel. The American Negro is the solvent of the Anglo-Saxon arrogance. If our money and training can transform them into shock troopers, a new world follows. And Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School, see this video for some more details about that. In an essay of liberation, he says the ghetto population of the United States constitutes such a force, they form natural geographic centres from which the struggle can be mounted against targets of vital economic and political importance. Marcuse here positions black urban populations as a basic force for upheaval due to unmet needs. Compare them to historical revolutionary underclasses. And of course, more recently, our beautiful leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement embody all of these ideas when they said, and I quote in a 2015 interview, "Myself and Alyssa, in particular, are trained organisers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories. And I think what we should really try to do is build a movement that could be really utilised by many, many black folks." I'm only glossing the surface here, but in essence, instead of using traditional Marxist means to stir up tensions and eventually revolution by agitating the working class, this doesn't really work well in developed Western countries. And so instead of using class to usher in their vision for the world, they use race. And so when a criminal scum reaches his inevitable conclusion with the police, the systemic ideological propaganda that has infected entire demographics of people forces them or causes them to behave in a certain way when one of their good boys is put to bed for good. And Andrew Breitbart here, he kind of breaks this down a little bit further.
They came up with at the end of the day, we could call it cultural Marxism, but at the end of the day, we experience it on a day-to-day basis. And by that I mean a minute-by-minute, second-by-second basis. it's political correctness, and it's multiculturalism. And what it took was this amazing concept of e pluribus unum, where everybody comes here and contributes to this, everybody becomes an American and contributes, but we have a common culture, we have a common border, a common mindset. What they did was take the haves versus have-nots friction and translated it into oppressor versus the oppressed. And
this got taken up by faculties across the country. That's the point of the Frankfurt School and the progressivism.
They
it becomes embraced by 60s
post-structuralism,
academics.
Post-structuralism, queer studies, African American studies, all of that is pitting people against each other. It is anti-American to its core.
And what of Mark Duggan's children? Will they be able to break free and deconstruct the evil white man laws which keep them down, or will they be convicted for the exact same crimes? What's this? Mark Duggan's son, Kimani Duggan, jailed for gun crimes committed in 2023? It's just all so tiresome. What happened in 2011, what happened in 2020 will happen again, since the climate for these incidents has only become more volatile. And for a more historical perspective, leaning into the United States aspect of this, as to how the cycle of riots has been going on for more than 60 years now. Check out this video on the channel for some more information on that. But there we have it. Riots will continue for as long as certain demographics are used as biological weapons to destroy Western civilization from within. This issue is not isolated to the UK or the United States. It is widespread across all of Europe. But I hope today's video was illustrative to the widespread issues that we face before ourselves. What's the solution? Well, let me know down below, but please be aware the comments being too edgy will be flagged by YouTube and will not be published, so please be creative in your language. But I hope you enjoyed the video, do the thing algorithm likes, and until next time.